I don't want to tell you. To which the bird said, please tell me. To which the owner said, I saw a fellow bird who simply died on its spot. At that moment, the owner looks at the bird he owns, and that bird died on its spot. The owner begins to cry and says, the sun and the moon of my life has left me now. And he takes out his bird from the cage, and he puts it on the ground. His bird suddenly flies. And his bird, as it is flying, looks at the owner and says, oh my owner, I thank you for taking my plea and listening to my instruction. And you took it to the birds and they taught me one message, that in order for me to get freedom, I first had to die and then I could fly in the world of freedom. Here is the understanding that the human being sometimes needs to die to open up the world of freedom. Because in death, some people may view it as freedom. And therefore, Bahlul once had a great conversation with Harun al-Rashid, trying to show him how death levels all of us. You all know, of course, Bahlul being the companion of our seventh Imam, Imam Musa al-Kadhim. Bahlul comes forward one day, he acts in a way of insanity, but in order to try and give a message. Bahlul is there, and Harun al-Rashid comes in. Harun al-Rashid sees Bahlul, and having seen Bahlul, he sees Bahlul playing with these skulls in the graveyard, and he sees Bahlul also drawing a line with a stick. He comes to Bahlul and says, Bahlul, what are you doing? What is this that you're doing? Bahlul says, well, I am playing with skulls and I'm drawing this line. So he says, what's the point of you drawing this line? He says, the line is this length to show you that whether you are a king or you're a pauper, we will all go into a grave at the same feet. And then he says to him, why do you play with the skulls? He says, look at all these skulls in the graveyard. You cannot tell which one would belong to Harun al-Rashid and which one would belong to an insane person like Bahlul. All of them remain the same when they die in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, within Bahlul, he's trying to bring about the understanding about death being a leveler. That when we all come to die, we are all level. It all returns. It is only our acts that determine our strength. And that's why the prophets of Allah, each one of them sought to understand the concept of death. From whichever prophet you look in the Quran or you look in history, they sought to understand the concept of death in order that it would allow them to reach certainty in their life. As an example, Prophet Uzair comes in the Quran. In Surah Al-Baqarah we find Prophet Uzair, who was one of the most learned prophets, who had learned the Torah inside out. Prophet Uzair walks past the town, and he sees that this city, this town, everyone has died in there. It's all decayed. With him was his donkey, and with him was some fresh grapes. Prophet Uzair at this moment, he wondered, he said, Ya Allah, can you raise the dead and make them alive? Who will actually bring life to this dead nation? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered that Prophet Uzair was to die for 100 years. He then ordered for Prophet Uzair to be woken up again, brought back to life. Prophet Uzair, when he wakes up, what happens is, he looks around and an angel comes to him. This angel comes to him and says to him, for how long have you been asleep? He says, maybe for a day or part of a day. He says to him, you've actually been asleep for 100 years. He says, 100 years? He says, 100 years you have been asleep. You asked about Allah, how can He raise the dead and make them alive? You've been asleep for 100 years, and now I'll show you how everything remained in the same situation. He said, how? He said, look at your grave. Weren't they fresh? He said, yes. He said, look at their condition now. They're still fresh. He said, okay. He said, now look at your donkey. He said, weren't you on your donkey? He said, yes. He said, now look at your donkey. It has completely decayed and withered away. He said, but do you want us to show you how we raise the dead and make them alive? He said, yes, please show me. He said, look at that donkey. Call with the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will come alive straight away. He calls with the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we find that that donkey rises right in front of him. In this way, Prophet Uzair sought within him, because he sought a question that we all ask. Is it true that we will be raised alive again? Will there be a day when we are all going to be raised alive, where we all have to answer questions for the salah that we prayed, for the fasting that we fasted, for the way we followed Muhammad? As the Quran says in Surah Yasin, the questioner asked the Prophet Muhammad, مَنْ يُحْيِي الْعِظَامِ وَهِيَ رَمِيمٌ? Who's going to raise the dead bones, these decayed bones? Who's going to raise them on the day? And the Quran replies, يُحْيِيهَا الَّذِي أَنْشَاهَا أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ. The one who will raise it will be the one who created it just as it was the first time. So here we find even Nabi Ibrahim, with all his greatness, with all his positioning, even he wants to reach a highest level of certainty in asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Allah, can you raise the dead and make them alive? Because Nabi Ibrahim had heard that the Khalil of Allah, his friend, will be someone who will actually come and ask him, Ya Allah, how can you raise the dead and make them alive? To which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala replied, are you not certain? And to which Nabi Ibrahim replied, I want my heart to become more certain. So this moment Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I'll tell you how we raise the dead and make them alive. Get 4 different birds and sacrifice them. He gets the 4 birds, he sacrifices them. He then says, now get each one of these birds, the parts, put it on 4 different mountain tops. So he puts the parts of the 4 birds on 4 different mountain tops. He says to him, now Ibrahim, with my permission, call out each of these birds. You will see them come back in exactly the same way they were. Nabi Ibrahim calls out to them, oh birds, come out. You found that each of these 4 birds came back into the exact way that he had sacrificed them. So we find here that a prophet of Allah within himself seeks to understand this concept of death. And indeed, it's not only the concept of resurrection. One seeks to understand what will happen to us in the grave. One seeks to understand what exactly will bring us success on the day of judgment. Indeed, you find that the human being, in his final moment, even before death, his whole belief can change. That the one who claimed to be a mu'min all his life can suddenly change his faith 1 minute before he dies. And the one who was a disbeliever all his life, just before he dies, he can actually reach the highest level of Iman. As Nabi Musa narrates for us a story where Nabi Musa, he says that once there was 2 brothers. One was an atheist and one was a believer. And they lived in the same house as each other. They both used to interact with each other in every different way. But one brother who was the believer tried to make the atheist become a believer. And the atheist tried to make his brother become an atheist. They continued to squabble. One telling him there's no God. The other telling him, I'm telling you there's a God. The arguments would continue and continue until what happened once was that the believer brother, he was the poor one of them. And the atheist one, he was the richer one. They were both coming to the stairs. One is coming from the top of the stairs. The second is coming from the bottom of the stairs. The one who's coming from the top of the stairs, what happens with him, he's thinking, he's the atheist, he's thinking, look at my brother. He's a believer, but he's a poor man. Yet he still maintains all this belief. How great a position must this Iman give him? So he automatically became a believer. The believer who's coming up the stairs, he's thinking, you know my brother who's an atheist, he's so rich, yet he's an atheist. Surely Allah, if he was really there, would make me the rich one and not make him. So he turns towards atheism. As they're both, one's coming down the stairs, the other one's coming up the stairs, angel of death decided to take their soul at that moment. So the one who had thought he was a believer all his life died as an atheist. And the one who was an atheist all his life died as a believer. Therefore the human being, even in his final moment, whether tonight is our final moment, whether it's been 30 years, every single one of us can change at any moment. And therefore one of the stages of death which I'd like to examine today, which is a stage of the utmost importance, considering the idea that each one of us discusses the stage or reads the stage or seeks to understand the stage every single time in our life, is the stage of intercession in the school of Ahlul Bayt. We come forward in Du'a Tawassul. We say, Ya Aba Abdullah, Ya Hussein ibn Ali, Ayyuha al-Shaheed, Inna tawajjahna wastashfa'na wa tawassalna bika ila Allah wa qaddamnaka bayna yaday hajatina. This concept here where we say that Aba Abdullah, we ask him to intercede for us, between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is of the utmost importance within the school of Ahlul Bayt. Because we come forward in Laylatul Qadr and we get the Quran and all of us come forward and say, Bil Hussein, Bil Hussein, Bil Hussein, Bil Hussein, Bil Hussein. 10 times we come forward. Our brothers in other schools of Islam, they come to us and they say to us what? They come and they say to us that we do not believe in this concept of intercession. They come forward and say that you Shia, you've taken this intercession to a completely different level.